Hello, this is Todd Luck, and this is a review of the last half of Marvel's Tarzan run. And so we're going to be talking about issues 15 through 29, along with a couple annuals. This run has artwork by both John and Sal Buscema, and since they both have the same last name, from here on out, I'm just going to be referring to them as John and Sal. And so in my first review of Marvel Tarzan, we talked about the first half of the series, which was written by Roy Thomas with artwork by John. And so at this point, in the last half, Roy has left and John will be doing a few more issues and then Sal will take over. And transitions can be very controversial, right? If you go back earlier into the 70s when John took over the artwork for Conan the Barbarian, he was taking over from the extremely popular Barry Windsor Smith, and you can find all kinds of letters from readers in the early 1970s who were so upset about this, and they were like, John's ruining the book, his stuff looks awful. But by 1978, the combination of Roy Thomas's writing with John's artwork was a settled matter. Most fans were loving it, and a lot of them considered it to be the definitive comic book take on Conan. And so when Roy and John brought over the same magic to Tarzan, it was well received and to this day is typically well regarded. And so while Roy was doing adaptations during his run, what we got after that was two completely new stories. One was set at the Earth's core and one was set in New York, and you might be surprised which one I like better. And yes, transitioning to new writers on this series was very controversial, and while I was reading this last half of the series, I had some mixed feelings myself. I took copious notes, and at the end of one issue, I literally wrote the sentence, how the did this get published? And so, we will be exploring that question when we get there. Just a couple quick reminders before we get started. While Marvel is publishing Tarzan, it is not set in the Marvel Universe. Also, there is no English collection of Marvel Tarzan. If you see a collection online from Dynamite of this run, it is not real. It is a solicitation that is never happening. It's a zombie listing. Please report it. The only way to get these issues is to buy them, and you can find them on eBay or an online comic shop very easily. All right, so let's talk talent. So we start off with John doing the artwork. I'll show you the interior artwork later that he's done. He does most of the covers, and since I talked about him last time, I'm not going to dwell on him. He's a good artist. His brother Sal is going to take over the interior artwork starting with issue 19. And Sal was a very prolific artist for Marvel. How prolific? The very first comics my parents ever got me off a spinner rack were these three, and one of them was Incredible Hulk. And the interior artwork was by Sal, and it was very impressive. I just didn't pay attention to the credits back then, but chances are if you have Marvel comics from that era, you have Sal's artwork, and it's probably good. He was known for being both fast and good. So our initial new writer will be David Kraft. I'm not that familiar with him. He did the one-page Young Tarzan stories in Pizzazz magazine after Roy left that strip, and he also scripted some Tarzan issues for DC. He actually scripted one of Roy's Tarzan issues as well. He did other comics too. I saw an ad for a Beatles special with George Perez art that he wrote. I'm just not that familiar with him. This is a little bit before my time. So let's start with the positives, the good ideas that David Kraft brought to this book. So he has a new master villain for Tarzan to fight throughout this first plot line set at the Earth's core. The story is a series of parallel plot lines, just like a Burroughs novel, and one of them is following an African princess who ends up in the Earth's core, and that's pretty cool. The issues are actually divided into chapters, just like a novel, so that's kind of a cool way to try to capture that feeling of reading a Burroughs novel of Tarzan. Some of the action sequences are actually really interesting and well choreographed and are pretty exciting. And essentially it's trying to create a new Tarzan novel in comic book form, which is a great idea. I really admire the ambition of this storyline. Moving on to things I didn't enjoy about this Earth's Core plot line, it begins with some kind of rough dialogue. The Arabs are swearing by their beards constantly in the first issue. Also in that first issue, Tarzan is trying to save natives from being enslaved, and he actually calls them ignorant savages who are easily enslaved. Now, I will also say that's the first issue. The dialogue does get better as the story goes along. And there's also inconsistencies and lapses in logic. When they get to the prehistoric world that lines the Earth's core, this is what it looks like, right? In the novels, it describes it having a sky and a noonday sun, and you have this horizon that slopes upward. And here, I mean, they can literally see to the other end of the planet. The human eye can't see this far, kids. The villains turn out to be kind of lackluster too. We're stuck with these European henchmen for the main bad guy who are just boring cliches. When they get to Pellucidar, they do add pirates, but these guys kind of look like they're off of a stage play. There's also purple cannibals at the Earth's core, but to be honest with you, the prehistoric world inside of the Earth is usually more interesting than this. The villainous Mahars who used to rule the Earth's core are here. And by the way, from here on out, I'm showing you Sal's artwork. He took over with Tarzan number 19. At this point, David Kraft abruptly leaves the title, leaving plots for Bill Mantlo to come in and script. And that's why there are inconsistencies between this portrayal of the Mahars and the novels. Bill Mantlo was not familiar with them, so he ended up accidentally having male and female Mahars when they're all female in the novels, and why they can speak when in the novels they're actually deaf and can only communicate with each other mentally. And so those inconsistencies with the novel bothered a lot of people and still do to this day. I don't mind so much, right? We established in the first half of the series that Roy Thomas gave Tarzan a loincloth in a completely different way than was shown in Tarzan of the Apes. We established that the Earth's core looked different when they showed it in this plot line than the way it does in the novels. So I can accept that, there are some differences between Marvel Tarzan and the real thing. But I definitely had some real problems with this run. And so instead of going through each individual problem in every issue, I'm just going to pick out an issue and give you some examples. And so this is issue 22, and this is the one I was wondering how it got published, including this cover, because I have no idea what the heck this thing is Tarzan's fighting. The arc's master villain is Abdul al-Hazred, the Mad Arab, and he has superpowers, which seems really out of place in a Burroughs-inspired story. And we find out he actually names himself the Mad Arab after he gets powers, which doesn't make any sense. And yes, he has this name of the Lovecraft villain who wrote the Necronomicon, but has absolutely no relation to that character, which makes even less sense. The plot revolves around the Mahars trying to get revenge on the Earth's core with a high-tech cannon powered by an empathic sonic crystal, which seems really out of place. In the cannon's control room, the African princess somehow knows there's circuitry in the control panels. Keep in mind that this is set in the 1920s, and when she hits the panel, it somehow causes an explosion so big that it destroys everything in the room except our heroes. And then there's the Mahars. This is a reminder of what they look like in issue 20. We can haggle over the interpretation, but they're clearly dinosaurs. And keep in mind, Sal is doing the layouts here, and he's letting other artists finish him, and so it can vary greatly. And so in issue 22, they now have ripped humanoid bodies. They've been working out. What the heck is this? How the did this get published? Since two of my favorite all-time comic creators were in charge of this series, Jim Shooter, editor-in-chief of Marvel Comics, and Bob Hall, who was editor, I want to take a bit to explain how the this got published. The 1970s were a very difficult time for the comic book industry. You may enjoy some of the stories that came out of the 70s, But business-wise, they were definitely in danger of the whole thing collapsing. Marvel was on the top of the heap, but that heap was a flaming dumpster fire. It was so bad that when Jim Shooter took over as editor-in-chief in 1978, he was told that he was there to preside over the death of Marvel Comics. However, Big Jim had other ideas, and he was going to turn this thing around. He had two problems. One was inconsistent quality of the books, and the other was that the books were constantly late, which was costing them money at the printer. He decided to prioritize getting the books on time, and then he would focus on making them good. To accomplish this, he put Bob Hall as editor of half of Marvel's color titles with the goal of getting them on time. He utilized John and Sal a lot because they were very fast artists. Bob Hall took a position as editor for 6 months while waiting on a deal with a play to go through in Europe. Hall was a producer and co-author of the play The Passion of Dracula, which was successful. He continued to do freelance work for Marvel after that, including being one of the best finishers on Sal's artwork in Tarzan. Bob Hall would go on to draw some very memorable issues of the Avengers written by Jim Shooter. At Valiant in the 90s, he would take over Shadow Man from Jim Shooter, and he would write and draw the title, and it would become one of my all-time favorites. This is my first time learning Bob Hall had worked on Tarzan, and I'd love to see him write and draw a Tarzan story. And so we just have a lot of really talented creators who are in difficult situations trying to get the books out on time, and that's how we ended up with a storyline that's less than perfect. And so the Earthcore plotline will wrap up with issue 23. And even with my mixed feelings, I do recommend trying it out. I mean, there's a lot of interesting ideas in here and a lot of heart. And it's just, it's hard for everything to line up to produce a really good comic book. But don't worry, kids, that's exactly what's about to happen with this series. But first, let's talk about Tarzan Annual 2. So this is another completely new story, and this is actually Sal's first artwork on Tarzan. He actually drew this before issue 19, and this is actually Bill Mantlo's first completely original story that he wrote for Tarzan. And just keep in mind before I show the interiors that they keep switching up finishers for Sal's artwork, and the results can vary. So the art is a little rough here because of the finisher, but the storytelling is absolutely there. Tarzan helps an African princess who lives in this skull fortress with these cool-looking warriors painted up like skeletons. So this is a solid, enjoyable, self-contained story. I don't want to give too much away, but let's just say Tarzan is a badass, and the African princess and her warriors get to do something cool at the end. And it was just a nice change of pace. This came out during the Earthcore plot line and would have been published the same month as Tarzan 20. And this just acts as a nice preview of the quality stories that we're going to get. So issue 24 begins the final New York plot line of this series, and it's written by Bill Mantlo without any plots from anyone else. This is pure Mantlo, and he is a very prolific writer for Marvel. He has done Hulk, he's done Rom, he's done Micronauts, and I would have never guessed he would be this good on Tarzan. But before we get to the interiors, let's talk about the covers because they're some of my favorite for this series. I love this cover for 24. This really captures what happens on the interior and really just captures just the essence of Tarzan with this absolute cliffhanger, literal cliffhanger, right? Jane's going off a cliff on the cover. Issue 24 actually has a cover by Rick Butler, and it is great. This is actually my favorite cover of the last half of this series. I just love this fight scene. It's just so kinetic, and Tarzan looks just so badass taking on all these guys by himself. Issue 26, another perfect cover for the story. Captured Tarzan getting electrocuted. Super dramatic, another cover by Rick Butler. And issue 27 gives us our last Buckler cover. and is very dramatic. Now, this one actually confused me a little bit. I thought this was a four-armed white ape from Mars, but if you look closely, no, that's actually the ape's leg and not a fourth arm. And so with issue 28, John returns to doing the covers, and we have Tarzan as King Kong on top of the Empire State Building. And so this is either corny or brilliant, depending on your point of view, but it is certainly one of the most memorable covers of this entire series. And we'll talk about issue 29, the final issue, in a minute, but let's talk about the New York plotline. Let's take a look at those interiors and what makes this plotline actually work. The story begins in Africa with Jane and the Waziri trying to stop a stampede caused by hunters. This is a great use of their characters, perfectly orients the reader to them, and is very in keeping with their characters and just has some wonderful action, classic cliffhangers, just feels very much like a Burroughs story. The villains are actually interesting and distinct, representing the worst of Western civilization, led by a bring them back alive hunter. They're formidable opponents who capture both Tarzan and Jane, taking them to New York. Korak, son of Tarzan, finally starts to appear in the series with issue 27, and he starts to track down his parents. And I gotta tell you, this introduction splash page by Sal of Korak is one of my favorite images with this character ever. Jane has her own subplot where she has to escape from the bad guys, and she's a total badass. It feels straight out of the novels. And Sal's artwork is absolutely part of the draw of this plot line. Sal and Bill Mantlo work so well together. He uses Sal to his best abilities, and there's a whole sequence of Tarzan just swinging through the jungle at the beginning of the story that's beautiful to behold. And look at this amazing spread of this nightclub where Tarzan and the captive animals are being displayed. Not only does it capture the themes of Tarzan versus civilization perfectly, but look at everything going on in this panel. Look at the brilliant design work. This is such a cool looking club. And all the life we see in each person in this scene, this is what comic book art should be. And I'm not saying that this is a flawless storyline. There are some minor mistakes. There are some visual inconsistencies created by all the different finishers they had on Sal. But overall, I just really enjoyed this story. It's a great arc. I mean, they even start doing story recaps per issue, and that was sorely lacking in the last plot line. And so really, I mean, everything starts firing on all cylinders with this plot line. Great writing, great art. They absolutely get how to do Tarzan. And of course, that's why the series had to end with the next issue. So 29 is the final issue, and it's pretty much a story of Tarzan getting on a boat, trying to get back to Africa after the New York plot line, and things happened. It's just an okay issue, but it does act as a very satisfying and complete wrap up for the series, and probably one of the most appropriate last issue covers ever, where they're literally getting off of a sinking ship. The strangest part is I don't think they knew that was going to be the last issue in advance, because in issue 28, you can still order a subscription to Tarzan. And in the letter column for issue 28, they were still trying to figure out what the name of the letter column was going to be. So I have no idea why issue 29 was the last issue, but it was. But there was one last story in this run, and that is Tarzan Annual 3. This is a follow-up to Tarzan and the Ant-Man. And there's some really neat ideas here. And by the way, they are correctly colored on the interior. I don't know what happened with the colors here with the green-haired cave woman and the black Ant-Man, but it is correct on the interiors. This is by Bill Mantlo and Sal. There's some good ideas here, some cool scenes, but the story really needed something longer than just an annual to tell. So the follow-up to the Ant-Man, yeah, it was a little bit too short. And this sadly would mark the end of an era, because Tarzan had been regularly published in comic book form up until this final issue. And that would be it for Tarzan in American comics. because he would pretty much just sit out the 80s. I mean, the only news story we got in America was when Marvel did an adaptation of half of Tarzan of the Apes that released around the time Greystoke came out. And that's a shame because not only did Jim Shooter succeed in getting the Marvel comics to come out on time and making them good, but he revitalized the company, heralding a new golden age for Marvel in the 1980s when they became a pop culture juggernaut. They built on the licensing success that they had with titles like Conan and Star Wars, adding long-running titles based on ROM and Micronauts in the late 1970s, followed by long-running series of the Transformers and G.I. Joe, whose stories they actually helped develop for their toy lines, turning them into pop culture juggernauts. And Marvel became the go-to company for every type of licensed comic imaginable, everything from adaptations of movies to toy lines, cartoons, comic strips. Marvel did it all, and typically they did it very well. And so the mind boggles at the possibilities of what could have happened if Marvel had a chance to take another swing at Tarzan back in the 80s. It's certainly one of the missed opportunities of the franchise. But we can certainly appreciate the Tarzan comics that Marvel did give us, and they are certainly worth hunting down and picking up. All right, guys, like and subscribe for more videos. And until next time, see ya.